Have you ever wondered if someone predicted the identity of the current pope centuries before he was born? What if I told you that a 12th century Irish saint may have foreseen the exact sequence of popes leading up to our times, and that according to his prophecy we might be witnessing the final papacy before the end of the world? Stay with me as we uncover one of Christianity's most mysterious and controversial prophecies. When ancient words align with modern events, coincidence surrenders to prophecy. Unknown. Among the many prophecies that have captured the Christian imagination throughout history, few have generated as much intrigue and speculation as the so-called prophecy of the popes, attributed to Saint Malachy O'Morgair, a 12th century Irish archbishop. This enigmatic text, which purportedly predicts the identity of every pope from the 12th century until the end of time, has fascinated scholars, theologians, and prophecy enthusiasts for centuries, particularly as we seemingly approach its dramatic conclusion. According to tradition, Malachy received this prophetic vision during a visit to Rome in 1139, while Pope Innocent II was in office. The story goes that while on pilgrimage to the Eternal City, Malachy experienced a divine revelation showing him all future popes until the end of the world. He reportedly recorded these visions as a series of 112 short, cryptic Latin phrases, each corresponding to a future pontiff. The prophecy remained largely unknown until 1595, over 400 years after Malachy's death, when Benedictine monk Arnold Wion published it in his book Lignum Vitae. This significant time gap between the prophecy's supposed creation and its first publication has led many scholars to question its authenticity, suggesting it might actually be a 16th century forgery rather than a genuine 12th century prophecy. Despite these questions about its origins, the prophecy of the popes has demonstrated what many believe to be remarkable accuracy in describing subsequent pontiffs. Each pope is characterized by a brief Latin motto that supposedly relates to their name, coat of arms, birthplace, or some significant aspect of their papacy. For instance, the motto for Pope John Paul II was De labore solis, or from the labor of the sun. Supporters point out that John Paul II was born during a solar eclipse and was buried on the day of a solar eclipse, coincidences that seem to align strikingly with his designated motto. What makes this prophecy particularly relevant today is its ominous conclusion. According to the text, after the 111th Pope, believed by many to correspond to Benedict XVI, comes the final Pope, described as Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman. The prophecy states that during this final papacy, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. This apocalyptic prediction has led many to speculate about whether Pope Francis, who succeeded Benedict XVI in 2013, might be this final Peter the Roman described in Malachy's prophecy. While Francis does not call himself Peter and was born in Argentina rather than Rome, some proponents of the prophecy point to connections that might fulfill the cryptic description. Francis's birth name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio, and his father, Pietro, Peter, was an Italian immigrant from the Rome region. As a Jesuit, he is part of the Society of Jesus, Societas Jesu, which could connect to the Roman aspect through the SJ that follows a Jesuit's name. Before delving deeper into these potential connections, it's important to understand the historical context of Saint Malachy himself. Born around 1094 in Armagh, Ireland, Malachy became Archbishop of Armagh and later Bishop of Down. He was known for his piety and commitment to church reform in Ireland. He died in 1148 at the Abbey of Clairvaux, in the arms of his friend Saint Bernard, who later wrote his biography. Notably, Bernard's extensive Biography makes no mention of any prophecy concerning future popes, which has further fueled skepticism about the authenticity of the text attributed to Malachy. The Catholic Church has never officially recognized the prophecy of the popes as authentic or included it in its canon of approved private revelations. Most Vatican scholars and historians consider it apocryphal at best and a clever forgery at worst. They point to the remarkable accuracy of the prophecy for popes before its 1595 publication and its more ambiguous, stretching interpretations required for subsequent pontiffs as evidence that it was likely created shortly before its publication. Nevertheless, the prophecy's potential implications continue to fascinate both believers and skeptics alike, particularly as global events increasingly align with apocalyptic scenarios described in biblical prophecy. The Book of Revelation describes a time of great tribulation before Christ's return, including challenges to the faith and the ultimate destruction of Babylon, which some interpreters have historically connected to Rome. The timing of Benedict XVI's unprecedented resignation in 2013, the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years, added fuel to speculative fires. Benedict was the 111th pope on Malachy's list, described as Gloria Olivae, or Glory of the Olive. Some connected this to Benedict's choice of papal name, as the Benedictine order is sometimes associated with olives. His resignation paved the way for the election of Pope Francis, potentially corresponding to the final pope on Malachy's list. Pope Francis's papacy has certainly been marked by significant developments that some see as aligning with end times expectations. His emphasis on reforming the Church, his focus on environmental issues, his outreach to other religions, and his calls for a more equitable global economic system represent, for some observers, precisely the kind of papacy one might expect during times of global transformation and spiritual challenge. For those who accept the authenticity of Malachy's prophecy, the implications are profound. If Pope Francis is indeed Petrus Romanus, then according to the prophecy, his papacy would witness the destruction of Rome and the final judgment. This aligns with apocalyptic scenarios described in Scripture, particularly in the Book of Revelation, where the fall of Babylon, interpreted by some as Rome, precedes the return of Christ. However, it's important to approach such interpretations with both scholarly rigor and spiritual discernment. Throughout history, many generations have believed they were living in the end times, seeing signs and fulfillments of prophecy in their contemporary world events. From the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD to the Black Death to the World Wars, Christians have repeatedly identified their present tribulations as the prophesied end times scenarios. This pattern should perhaps encourage some humility in interpreting current events and figures through prophetic lenses. As Jesus himself cautioned in Matthew 24:36, "About that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." This scripture reminds believers that while watching for prophetic signs is appropriate, claiming certainty about specific fulfillments often leads to disappointment and disillusionment. Nevertheless, the convergence of Malachy's prophecy with current global developments has led many to consider whether we might indeed be approaching a pivotal moment in spiritual history. Climate change, pandemic disease, geopolitical tensions, technological revolution, and moral uncertainty characterize our age in ways that seem to align with biblical descriptions of the end times. In this context, Pope Francis's papacy takes on potentially profound significance, regardless of whether one accepts Malachy's prophecy as authentic. As the leader of over 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide and a significant moral voice on the global stage, Francis's words and actions influence not only religious discourse, but geopolitical and social developments as well. The controversy surrounding Malachy's prophecy extends far beyond academic debates about its authenticity. To truly understand its significance, we must examine the specific content of the prophecy, especially its chilling final predictions, and how these might relate to the current papacy and world events. The complete prophecy of the popes consists of 112 brief Latin mottos, each supposedly describing a pope from Celestine II, elected in 1143, through the final pope who would witness the end of Rome and perhaps the world itself. The first 74 mottos match popes preceding its 1595 publication with remarkable precision, which is one reason skeptics believe it was likely created shortly before publication rather than in the 12th century. For popes after 1595, the connections become more tenuous and often require creative interpretation. Nevertheless, many observers have found striking correlations. Pope Pius Num, 1846–1878, was designated Crux de Cruz, or Cross from a Cross, and his papacy witnessed the loss of the Papal States to the House of Savoy, whose emblem was a cross. Leo Septuagint, 1878–1903, was Lumen in Caelo, or light in the sky, and his coat of arms featured a shooting star. As we approach modern times, the prophecy identifies Pope John Paul I, 1978, as De Mediatate Lunae, or from the half-moon. His papacy lasted only 33 days, beginning and ending with half-moon phases. John Paul II, 1978–2005, was De Labore Solis, or from the labor of the sun. And as mentioned earlier, his life was remarkably bookended by solar eclipses, born during one and buried during another. Benedict XVI, 2005–2013, was designated Gloria Olivae, or Glory of the Olive. Before his elevation to the papacy, some prophecy watchers had associated this motto with the Olivetan order of Benedictine monks, making his choice of the name Benedict seemingly significant. Others noted that the olive branch is a symbol of peace, and Benedict focused much of his papacy on reconciliation, particularly with Orthodox and traditional Catholic communities. But it's the final entry in Malachy's list that has generated the most intense speculation. After Benedict XVI comes Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman, described in far more detail than any previous entry. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations, and when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. This apocalyptic conclusion suggests that the final pope would witness extraordinary tribulations, the destruction of Rome, traditionally built on 7 hills, and the final judgment. For those who believe Malachy's prophecy is authentic, Pope Francis's election in 2013 takes on profound eschatological significance. While Francis did not take the name Peter, prophecy enthusiasts have identified several connections that might fulfill the Petrus Romanus description. His father's name was Pietro, Peter Bergoglio, an Italian immigrant from the Turin region. Although born in Argentina, Francis has Italian heritage, potentially connecting him to Roman. As mentioned earlier, his membership in the Society of Jesus, Jesuits, provides another possible connection. Through the abbreviation SJ, Francis's choice of papal name is also seen by some as significant. He is the first pope to choose the name Francis, honoring Francis of Assisi, who received a divine commission to rebuild my church, and whose birth name was Giovanni di Pietro, John, son of Peter, Bernardone. Some interpreters see this connection to Pietro Peter as potentially fulfilling the prophecy. Beyond these name connections, many aspects of Francis's papacy seem to align with what one might expect from a final pope in times of global tribulation. He has emphasized church reform, environmental stewardship, care for the poor, interfaith dialogue, and a more pastoral approach to controversial moral issues. These priorities could be seen as preparing the church for significant challenges and pasturing his sheep in many tribulations. Francis has also been notably outspoken on global issues like climate change, migration, economic inequality, and international conflict, matters that many see as central to the tribulations preceding the end times. His 2015 encyclical Laudato Si warned of environmental catastrophe without concerted global action, and his subsequent pronouncements have addressed various crises facing humanity. These global concerns align with biblical warnings about the end times. In Matthew 24, Jesus describes wars, famines, earthquakes, and widespread tribulation before his return. The book of Revelation outlines a series of catastrophic events affecting the Earth's environment, political structures, and human society. For those who interpret Malachy's prophecy in light of Scripture, Francis's focus on these global challenges appears potentially prophetic. The unprecedented nature of Benedict XVI's resignation in 2013 added further intrigue to the prophetic scenario. No pope had resigned since Gregory V in 1415, and many saw this extraordinary development as potentially fulfilling prophecy. The unusual situation of having a Pope Emeritus living in the Vatican while a new Pope reigned created a unique moment in church history that some interpreted as signaling the transition to the final papacy. Benedict's resignation speech contained language that some found prophetically significant. He spoke of a church that suffers and a world shaken by questions of deep relevance for the life of faith. He mentioned today's world, subject to so many rapid changes and shaken by questions of deep relevance for the life of faith. These references to suffering, shaking, and challenges to faith resonated with the tribulations mentioned in Malachy's final prophecy. While the Catholic Church has never officially recognized Malachy's prophecy, it has been the subject of intense interest among certain Vatican insiders. In 1969, before becoming Pope, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, made a remarkable radio broadcast predicting a future church that would become small and will have to start afresh more or less from the beginning. He described a tremendous upheaval, after which the church would emerge simplified and more spiritual. This vision of a purified church emerging from tribulation aligns with both biblical eschatology and the final portion of Malachy's prophecy. The book of Revelation describes a faithful remnant persevering through the end times tribulation, and Jesus himself asked whether he would find faith on the earth when he returns, Luke 18:8. For these reasons, many observers view Pope Francis's papacy through an apocalyptic lens, watching for signs that might confirm Malachy's prophecy about the final pope who would witness Rome's destruction and the ultimate judgment. Each major development in Francis's papacy, from his environmental advocacy to his outreach to other religions to his reforms of Vatican governance, is scrutinized for potential prophetic significance. However, it's important to note that the Church has witnessed numerous prophetic claims throughout its history, many of which have proven false or have required reinterpretation as time passed. Jesus himself warned against attempts to predict the exact timing of the end, stating in Matthew 24:36 that about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. This caution suggests that while believers should remain watchful and discerning about prophetic signs, dogmatic assertions about specific fulfillments, like definitively identifying Pope Francis as Malachy's Petrus Romanus, may go beyond what Scripture authorizes. Throughout church history, many generations have believed they were witnessing the final events before Christ's return, only to see history continue in unexpected ways. At the same time, Jesus did instruct his followers to recognize the signs of the times, comparing them to fig leaves that indicate summer is near, Matthew 24:32-33. This suggests that while exact predictions are inappropriate, general awareness of prophetic patterns and their potential fulfillment remains a valid Christian practice. For those studying Malachy's prophecy, this balanced approach means neither dismissing potential connections to current events nor making absolute claims about Pope Francis being the final pope. Instead, it involves watching with discernment, comparing developments with Scripture, and remaining open to how God's prophetic purposes might unfold in ways that transcend human expectations. To fully appreciate the potential significance of Malachy's prophecy in relation to the current papacy, we must examine how Pope Francis's background, election, and actions during his pontificate might align with the prophetic description of Petrus Romanus and the biblical signs of the end times. When Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected Pope on March 13, 2013, several aspects of his background immediately caught the attention of prophecy watchers. Though born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Bergoglio is the son of Italian immigrants, with his father Pietro Bergoglio hailing from the Piedmont region of northwestern Italy. This connection to both Pietro, and Italian heritage provided the first tenuous links to the Petrus Romanus description. His choice of the papal name Francis was unprecedented, the first pope in history to select this name. He chose it to honor Saint Francis of Assisi, the 13th century friar known for his vow of poverty, love for animals and nature, and commitment to rebuilding the church. What many found significant was that Saint Francis's birth name was Giovanni di Pietro Bernardone, literally John, son of Peter. This created another potential connection to the Peter element of Malachy's final prophecy. Furthermore, as a member of the Jesuit order, Society of Jesus, his name in religious contexts would traditionally be followed by S.J., providing another possible connection to the Roman aspect through this Latin abbreviation. These coincidences, while requiring some interpretive flexibility, struck many observers as potentially fulfilling the cryptic Petrus Romanus description in ways that wouldn't have been immediately obvious. Beyond these name connections, the circumstances of Francis's election contained elements that some viewed as prophetically significant. Benedict XVI's unprecedented resignation in February 2013 created a situation not seen in the Church for nearly 600 years. The lightning strike that hit St. Peter's Basilica the very day of Benedict's resignation announcement was interpreted by some as a divine sign, recalling Jesus' words in Luke 10:18, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." The conclave that elected Francis was also marked by unusual events. According to Cardinal Christoph Schönborn, Francis was not on the early shortlists of papal candidates, but emerged surprisingly during the voting process. The speed of his election, after just 5 ballots, suggested to some a divine intervention in the process. Upon his election, Francis's first actions demonstrated a striking departure from tradition. He declined the red papal mozzetta cape, chose simple silver rather than gold for his papal ring, and opted to reside in the Vatican guest house rather than the Apostolic Palace. These choices signaled his emphasis on humility and simplicity, virtues associated with his namesake, Saint Francis of Assisi. For those interpreting Malachy's prophecy, these actions seemed appropriate for a final pope who would shepherd his flock through tribulations and prepare the Church for judgment. The motto of Pope Francis's papal coat of arms, Miserando atque eligendo, by having mercy and by choosing, also struck some as significant in light of the prophecy. The phrase comes from a homily by the Venerable Bede regarding Jesus' calling of Matthew, the tax collector. This emphasis on mercy and divine calling resonated with the shepherding role described for Petrus Romanus, who would pasture his sheep in many tribulations. Pope Francis's pontificate has indeed been characterized by numerous challenges and tribulations that some see as aligning with both Malachy's prophecy and biblical descriptions of the end times. Global events during his papacy have included the rise of ISIS and increased Christian persecution in the Middle East, the global migration crisis, escalating climate change impacts, the COVID-19 pandemic, growing geopolitical tensions, and widespread moral and social upheaval. Within the Church itself, Francis has faced significant challenges, including the ongoing sexual abuse crisis, financial scandals at the Vatican Bank, sharp divisions between progressive and traditional factions, declining religious practice in Western nations, and theological disputes over issues like communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. These internal and external tribulations align with what many would expect during the reign of a final pope before judgment. Francis's response to these challenges has often emphasized mercy, pastoral flexibility, and concern for the marginalized, approaches that have drawn both praise and criticism. His 2016 apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, sparked controversy by appearing to open a path for divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion in certain circumstances. This led 4 cardinals to submit formal questions, dubia, challenging the document's compatibility with traditional church teaching. Such internal divisions within Catholicism under Francis's leadership recall Jesus' warning in Matthew 24:10 that many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another in the end times. The unprecedented nature of cardinals publicly questioning papal teaching struck many observers as potentially fulfilling biblical warnings about confusion and apostasy before the end. Francis's emphasis on environmental issues, particularly in his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si', connected his papacy to apocalyptic themes of ecological crisis. The document warned of potentially catastrophic climate change and environmental degradation, calling for an ecological conversion among believers. For those interpreting Malachy's prophecy in light of Scripture, these warnings evoked the environmental disasters described in Revelation, such as the pollution of waters, Rev 8:10-11, extreme heat, Rev 16:8-9, and destruction of vegetation, Rev 8:7. The Pope's initiatives regarding global governance and economic systems have also drawn attention from prophecy watchers. His calls for stronger international institutions to address climate change, migration, and economic inequality align with concerns about the emergence of global systems of control described in some interpretations of Revelation 13. His criticism of unfettered capitalism and advocacy for economic redistribution have been seen by some as preparing for the economic instability prophesied for the end times. Francis's interfaith outreach, including his historic meeting with Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayeb in 2019, resulting in the document on human fraternity, and his 2021 visit to Iraq, where he met with Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, represents unprecedented steps toward religious unity. While promoting peace and understanding is commendable, some prophecy interpreters have questioned whether such initiatives might inadvertently lay groundwork for the one world religion described in some interpretations of Revelation 17. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 presented perhaps the most visible tribulation of Francis's papacy thus far. The unprecedented shutdown of churches worldwide, including St. Peter's Basilica during Holy Week, created images that seemed almost apocalyptic, the Pope delivering his Urbi et Orbi blessing to an empty St. Peter's Square being particularly striking. Francis himself drew biblical parallels, comparing the pandemic to the flood in Noah's time and suggesting it might be nature's response to human ecological sins. Throughout these challenges, Francis has consistently emphasized the pastoral care of his flock, precisely what Malachy's prophecy suggests Petrus Romanus would do, pasturing his sheep in many tribulations. His focus on mercy, accompaniment, and meeting people where they are represents a shepherding approach particularly suited to times of crisis and uncertainty. Beyond specific events, perhaps the most significant aspect of Francis's papacy in relation to Malachy's prophecy has been his reform agenda within the Church. He has restructured Vatican finances, reorganized the Roman Curia, the Church's central administration, appointed cardinals from previously underrepresented regions, and emphasized synodality, a more consultative approach to church governance. These reforms could be interpreted as preparing the Church for a major transition, possibly the one described in the prophecy's conclusion. In 2015, Francis announced an extraordinary Jubilee Year of Mercy, encouraging reconciliation and forgiveness. While Jubilee years have biblical precedent, this was only the third extraordinary, outside the normal 25-year cycle, Jubilee since the tradition began in 1300. For prophecy interpreters, such an unusual focus on divine mercy could be seen as preparation for the dreadful judge mentioned in Malachy's final prophecy. Francis has also overseen significant developments regarding Marian devotion, another area often connected with end-times prophecy. In 2018, he added the memorial of Mary, Mother of the Church, to the universal calendar, and in 2019 he declared that the Feast of Our Lady of Loreto would be celebrated worldwide. These actions have been viewed by some as fulfilling prophecies from approved Marian apparitions like Fatima, which many Catholics connect with the end times. While the Catholic Church has never officially endorsed the Malachy prophecy, some of Francis's own statements have seemed to acknowledge a sense of living in extraordinary times. In a 2015 speech, he stated, "We are not living an era of change, but a change of era." In 2019, he told a group of priests that this is not simply one epoch of change, but the change of an epoch. Such language suggests a recognition of being at a hinge point in history, potentially aligning with the prophecy's placement of the final pope at history's culmination. The potential prophetic significance of Pope Francis extends beyond his personal background and specific actions to the broader context of his papacy within both Catholic tradition and biblical prophecy. When viewed through this wider lens, several patterns emerge that seem to align with both Malachy's description of Petrus Romanus and scriptural warnings about the end times. One striking aspect of Francis's papacy has been his focus on apocalyptic themes like ecological disaster, economic collapse, and global conflict. His 2015 address to the United Nations warned that we are facing a true right of the environment due to the selfish and boundless thirst for power and material prosperity. In his 2020 encyclical Fratelli Tutti, he described a world poised between gravely different options and facing dark clouds over a closed world. These warnings echo biblical descriptions of the tribulations preceding Christ's return. Francis's approach to church governance has emphasized what he calls synodality, a more consultative, decentralized model that some traditionalists fear could undermine papal authority and doctrinal unity. In 2021, he launched a global Synod on Synodality, a 2-year process of consultation aimed at making the Church more inclusive and participatory. While presented as a renewal, critics have warned that such reforms could potentially alter essential Catholic teachings in ways that align with prophecies about doctrinal confusion in the end times. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3, Paul warns that the day of the Lord will not come unless the rebellion comes first. Some interpreters have viewed this rebellion, or falling away, apostasia in Greek, as referring to a departure from traditional faith within the Church itself. Under Francis, controversial discussions have emerged regarding previously settled issues like communion for the divorced and remarried, blessing of same-sex unions, and intercommunion with non-Catholic Christians, developments that traditionalists see as potentially fulfilling warnings about doctrinal compromise before the end. The unprecedented resignation of Pope Benedict XVI that paved the way for Francis's election continues to resonate with prophetic implications. Benedict's decision to retain the title Pope Emeritus and continue wearing papal white created a unique situation of two living men who had held the papal office, a development without precedent in Church history. Some interpret this as potentially fulfilling the cryptic prophecy attributed to Saint Francis of Assisi, that before the end there would be an uncanonically elected pope who would create many cardinals. Francis's papacy has coincided with rare celestial events that some see as fulfilling biblical signs. The blood moon tetrad of 2014-2015, 4 consecutive total lunar eclipses coinciding with Jewish feasts, occurred during the early years of his pontificate. In August 2017, a total solar eclipse traversed the United States, followed by unusual hurricane activity and the appearance of the Revelation 12 sign in the stars on September 23, 2017, configuration that some interpreted as fulfilling the astronomical description in Revelation 12:1-2. Beyond specific events, Francis's general approach to doctrine has raised questions about his relationship to tradition. His reported statement that God cannot be God without man, and his comment that evangelization is not proselytism but attraction, represent departures from conventional Catholic formulations. While defenders see these as pastoral adaptations to modern sensibilities, critics warn they could potentially undermine essential teachings in ways that align with biblical warnings about doctrinal drift in the last days. The papacy's increasing alignment with global governance initiatives has also drawn prophetic scrutiny. In 2015, Francis strongly endorsed the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. In 2020, he called for a new Bretton Woods to reform the global financial system and endorsed what some have called the Great Reset, proposed by the World Economic Forum. While these positions can be understood as expressions of Catholic social teaching, they also align with concerns about the emergence of global systems described in some interpretations of Revelation. Francis's emphasis on mercy sometimes appears to come at the expense of traditional Catholic teachings on moral absolutes, a shift that some see as potentially fulfilling Paul's warning that the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. 2 Timothy 4:3. His reported private comment that everyone will be saved, and his public statement that atheists can be precious allies in building peace, have been interpreted by some as potentially diluting the Church's traditional emphasis on salvation through Christ alone. The Pope's interfaith initiatives have expanded beyond anything seen in previous pontificates. His 2019 document signed with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar stated that the pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race and language are willed by God in His wisdom. This statement troubled some theologians who saw it as potentially contradicting Jesus' claim to be the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. Such moves toward religious universalism align with concerns about the emergence of a one-world religion described in some interpretations of end-times prophecy. Even Francis's communication style has prophetic dimensions. Unlike his predecessors, who typically delivered carefully crafted theological expositions, Francis often speaks extemporaneously, sometimes making controversial statements in airplane interviews or private conversations that later become public. This informal approach has created frequent moments of confusion requiring Vatican clarifications, a pattern that recalls Jesus' warning about the increase of rumors and false reports in the end times, Matthew 24:23-26. The Pope's relationship with tradition-minded Catholics has been particularly strained. His 2021 motu proprio Traditionis Custodes severely restricted the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass that had been liberalized by Benedict XVI. This move alienated many conservative Catholics and intensified divisions within the Church, developments that align with Jesus' warning that many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another as the end approaches, Matthew 24:10. Francis's handling of moral issues has also generated controversy with prophetic overtones. His apparent openness to civil unions for same-sex couples, his revision of the Catechism to declare the death penalty inadmissible, and his reorganization of the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family have all represented departures from his predecessors' approaches. Such shifts on moral teaching align with biblical warnings about ethical confusion in the last days. Geographic aspects of Francis's papacy also contain potential prophetic significance. As the first pope from the Americas, specifically South America, Francis represents a historic shift of the Church's center of gravity away from Europe. This geographic expansion fulfills Jesus' prophecy that the gospel would be preached to all nations before the end, Matthew 24:14, and potentially signals the completion of the Church's global mission preceding Christ's return. The Vatican's relationship with Israel under Francis has prophetic implications as well. In 2015, the Vatican formally recognized the State of Palestine, implicitly challenging Israel's sovereignty claims. Biblical prophecy places Jerusalem at the center of end-times events, with Zechariah 12:2-3 describing it as a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Any papal positions on Israel potentially carry prophetic significance given Jerusalem's centrality in eschatology. Francis's repeated references to the devil and spiritual warfare represent another apocalyptic theme. Unlike some modern religious leaders who downplay supernatural evil, Francis frequently mentions Satan as an active force in the world. In his first homily as Pope, he warned that he who doesn't pray to the Lord prays to the devil, and he later described the sexual abuse crisis as the work of Satan. This emphasis on spiritual conflict aligns with Revelation's description of intensified demonic activity in the last days. Perhaps most significantly, Francis has overseen a church experiencing what many see as unprecedented crisis. The sexual abuse scandal, financial corruption, doctrinal divisions, and declining religious practice in Western nations have created what some observers describe as the greatest challenges to Catholicism since the Reformation. This sense of institutional crisis aligns with biblical descriptions of a time of testing for the faithful before Christ's return. As we conclude our exploration of Malachy's prophecy and its potential connection to Pope Francis, we must synthesize what we've learned and consider its implications for believers today. Whether one views the prophecy of the popes as authentic divine revelation or as an intriguing historical curiosity, its apparent alignment with current events invites serious reflection on our place in prophetic history. The final words of Malachy's prophecy describe an ominous conclusion. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations, and when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. This apocalyptic scenario aligns with biblical descriptions of the end times, particularly those found in the Book of Revelation, where Babylon, interpreted by many as Rome, falls before the final judgment. Pope Francis's papacy has indeed witnessed numerous tribulations that could be interpreted as fulfilling this prophecy. From the COVID-19 pandemic that temporarily closed churches worldwide to escalating climate disasters, from wars and rumors of wars to internal church divisions over doctrine and practice, the current era certainly seems marked by the kind of challenges described in biblical accounts of the end times. Francis's emphasis on mercy and pastoral care, pasturing his sheep in many tribulations, aligns with what Malachy's prophecy suggests would characterize the final pope. His calls for ecological conversion, economic justice, and compassion for migrants could be seen as preparing believers for the tribulations described in both the prophecy and Scripture. His reforms within the Church might be understood as readying the institution for its final transformation before Christ's return. For those who accept Malachy's prophecy as authentic, the implications are profound. If Pope Francis is indeed Petrus Romanus, then according to the prophecy, his papacy would witness the destruction of Rome and the final judgment. This aligns with biblical passages like Revelation 18, which describes the fall of Babylon the Great in a single hour, followed by the return of Christ in Revelation 19. However, it's essential to approach such interpretations with spiritual wisdom and biblical discernment. Throughout history, many generations have identified their contemporary tribulations as the prophesied end times scenarios. From the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD to the Black Death to the World Wars, Christians have repeatedly seen their present sufferings as fulfilling apocalyptic prophecies, only to witness history continue in unexpected ways. This pattern should perhaps encourage some humility in prophetic interpretation, as Jesus cautioned in Matthew 24:36, "About that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." This scripture reminds believers that while watching for prophetic signs is appropriate, claiming certainty about specific fulfillments can lead to disappointment and confusion. The Catholic Church itself has never officially recognized Malachy's prophecy, and many scholars, both Catholic and Protestant, consider it a likely 16th century creation rather than an authentic 12th century vision. The remarkable accuracy of the prophecy for popes before its 1595 publication and its more ambiguous, stretching interpretations required for subsequent pontiffs suggest it may have been created shortly before its publication. Nevertheless, the convergence of the prophecy's final predictions with current global developments has led many to consider whether we might indeed be approaching a pivotal moment in spiritual history. Climate change, pandemic disease, technological revolution, geopolitical tensions, and moral uncertainty characterize our age in ways that seem to align with biblical descriptions of the end times. For believers seeking to navigate these complex prophetic waters, several biblical principles provide guidance. First, maintain spiritual vigilance. Jesus repeatedly instructed his followers to watch and be ready. Matthew 24:42-44, suggesting that awareness of prophetic signs is an appropriate Christian practice. This vigilance involves both attention to world events and, more importantly, attention to one's own spiritual condition. Second, prioritize biblical authority. While historical prophecies like Malachy's may be intriguing, Scripture remains the believer's surest guide to understanding God's prophetic timeline. As 2 Peter 1:19 states, "We also have the prophetic message as something completely reliable, and you will do well to pay attention to it, as to a light shining in a dark place." Third, avoid date-setting or dogmatic identifications. Jesus explicitly warned against attempts to predict the exact timing of the end, Matthew 24:36. And church history is littered with failed predictions that damaged credibility and led to disillusionment. Humility in prophetic interpretation acknowledges the partial nature of our understanding. Fourth, focus on personal faithfulness. Jesus' parables about his return, like that of the wise and foolish virgins, Matthew 25:1-13, emphasize the importance of being spiritually prepared regardless of timing. Personal readiness matters more than precise prophetic timelines. Fifth, maintain a balanced perspective that neither dismisses prophetic warnings nor becomes obsessed with them. Paul encourages believers to test everything, hold fast what is good, 1 Thessalonians 5:21, suggesting a discerning approach that evaluates prophetic claims without uncritical acceptance or dismissal. Sixth, remember that the ultimate purpose of prophecy is not to satisfy curiosity, but to inspire faithful living. As Jesus stated after describing end-time signs, "When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Luke 21:28. Prophecy should produce hope and spiritual readiness, not fear or despair. Finally, maintain love as the supreme virtue. In 1 Corinthians 13:2, Paul writes that even if someone has the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, without love, they are nothing. This reminder helps keep prophetic interest in proper perspective. The question of whether Pope Francis fulfills Malachy's prophecy as Petrus Romanus ultimately remains open. The patterns and connections we've explored are suggestive but not definitive. What matters most is not reaching an absolute conclusion about this specific prophecy, but cultivating spiritual discernment and readiness for Christ's return, whenever it may occur. For Catholics, Francis's emphasis on mercy, simplicity, and care for the marginalized offers a model of Christian living that transcends prophetic speculation. For Protestants, the biblical call to test everything invites thoughtful evaluation of all religious claims and institutions, including the papacy, against the standard of Scripture. For all believers, the apparent convergence of prophetic signs in our time, whether connected to Malachy's prophecy or not, serves as a reminder that history is moving toward a divine conclusion. As Jesus promised in Revelation 22:12, "Look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done." While we cannot know with certainty whether Pope Francis is the final pope of Malachy's prophecy, we can respond to the prophetic possibilities of our time with renewed commitment to spiritual preparedness. If indeed we are witnessing the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, both biblical and extra-biblical, then our calling is clear: to stand firm in faith, to hold fast to truth, and to shine as lights in a darkening world. Like, share, and subscribe to deepen your understanding of biblical prophecy in our changing world. Drop a comment below. Do you see connections between Malachy's prophecy and Pope Francis? What signs of the end times have you noticed in today's headlines? Your perspective enriches this crucial conversation about faith and prophecy in these extraordinary times. When prophecy and present reality intersect, the wise discern not just what might end, but what endures forever.